Hey guys, tonight we delve into one of the most shocking and carefully hidden secrets in all of Westeros. The story of Tyrion Lannister's lost daughter, a brilliant young woman who possesses not only her father's wit and wisdom, but also the rightful claim to Casterly Rock that could reshape the entire future of House Lannister. This is a tale of forbidden love, political manipulation, and a bloodline so carefully concealed that even Tywin Lannister himself orchestrated its protection. What makes this story truly extraordinary is how it connects the deepest Lannister family mysteries with prophecies that date back to the Age of Heroes. We're talking about ancient words carved into the very foundations of Casterly Rock that speak of the smallest lion birthing the greatest, and how a daughter born in shadow would one day bring light back to the golden lions of the West. So before you settle in for this incredible journey, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Get into your blanket and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The story begins with a discovery that shook the very foundations of what we thought we knew about the Lannister legacy. Deep within the archives of the Red Keep, hidden beneath layers of dust and political deception, a single letter emerged after the War of the Five Kings. A letter written in Tyrion's own hand, but sealed with a sigil that no one recognized. A broken golden lion, but not the proud roaring beast of House Lannister. This lion was different. Smaller, more delicate, as if it represented something precious that needed protection rather than something fierce that demanded respect. The letter itself was addressed to someone called Elara, a name that appears nowhere in the official histories of Westeros. This was a woman whose very existence had been carefully erased from every official record in the Seven Kingdoms. Someone who had lived, loved, and given birth to a child that could change everything we understand about power, inheritance, and the true meaning of the Lannister name. But here's where the mystery deepens and becomes almost impossible to believe. The child mentioned in this letter, this daughter of Tyrion Lannister, wasn't raised in exile or poverty, as you might expect. She wasn't hidden away in some distant land, struggling to survive on scraps and stories of her noble heritage. Instead, she was raised in plain sight, educated as a proper lady, given lands and titles through a network of loyal houses that stretched across the Westerlands and beyond. The most incredible part, she doesn't even know who her real father is. For over 20 years, she has lived believing herself to be the daughter of a minor lord. Content with her modest holdings and quiet life, she has married, had children of her own, and built a legacy that honor the best traditions of the Westerlands, all while possessing a claim to Casterly Rock that supersedes every other claimant through the ancient laws of inheritance that even Tywin Lannister couldn't completely ignore. Tonight we're going to uncover how this deception was orchestrated, why the most powerful man in Westeros chose to protect the daughter of the son he claimed to despise, and what happens when the truth finally emerges from the shadows where it has been carefully guarded for more than 2 decades. This is a story about the power of hidden love, the complexity of family loyalty, and the ways that prophecy and politics interweave to create legends that echo through the halls of power for generations. By the time our journey ends, you'll understand why this one secret could reshape not just House Lannister, but the entire balance of power in the Seven Kingdoms. So let's begin this tale of hidden bloodlines and ancient prophecies, of love that transcended political boundaries and wisdom that recognized true worth even when it came in unexpected forms. In the years following the Great War, when the dust had settled and the realm had begun to heal from the devastation of dragon fire and winter's grip, Casterly Rock stood as it always had, a golden monument to Lannister power carved from the living stone of the western coast. The ancient seat of House Lannister rose from the shores of the Sunset Sea like a sleeping lion, its countless chambers and winding corridors holding secrets that stretched back to the Age of Heroes. It was here, in the depths of Winter's End, that Maester Qyburn's replacement, a scholarly man named Maester Darnell, had been tasked with cataloguing the vast archives that had accumulated over centuries of Lannister rule. Darnell was not like the twisted Maester who had served Cersei, but rather a man of genuine learning, sent from the Citadel to help restore order to the chaos of documents, ledgers, and correspondence that had been neglected during the wars. The task was overwhelming in its scope. Generations of Lannister lords had kept meticulous records, from the most significant political marriages down to the smallest expenditures for lamp oil in the deepest chambers. But it was in Tyrion's former quarters, rooms that had been sealed since his departure years earlier, that Maester Darnell discovered something that would change everything he thought he knew about the family he served. The chambers themselves told a story of intellectual curiosity and careful thought. Unlike the opulent excess found elsewhere in Casterly Rock, Tyrion's rooms had been furnished with comfort and practicality in mind. Shelves lined every wall, filled with books in a dozen different languages, maps of distant lands, and scrolls containing everything from engineering diagrams to philosophical treatises. The furniture was well made but not ostentatious, chosen for function rather than display. But it was behind a false panel in the wall, discovered quite by accident when Darnell had been examining the room's construction for historical documentation, that the most significant find awaited. The panel had been expertly concealed, designed to look like nothing more than a natural variation in the stonework. Inside, carefully preserved in an oiled leather satchel, were documents that would reshape understanding of the Lannister bloodline forever. The first document was that mysterious letter, written in Tyrion's distinctive hand but bearing the seal of the broken golden lion. The parchment was of the finest quality, suggesting this was no casual correspondence, but something of deep importance. The ink had faded slightly with age, but the words remained clear enough to read, though their meaning would require much deeper investigation to fully understand. Accompanying the letter were other materials that seemed deliberately chosen to preserve a story. There was a small portrait, painted with exquisite skill on ivory, showing a woman of perhaps 25 years with the distinctive green eyes of the Westerland's nobility and hair that caught golden highlights in the artist's careful rendering. Her face possessed an intelligence and kindness that seemed to leap from the portrait, and around her neck she wore a pendant that bore the same broken lion sigil found on the letter's seal. But perhaps most intriguing of all was a genealogical chart, hand-drawn and annotated in multiple different scripts, showing Lannister bloodlines stretching back through the centuries. Most of the entries were familiar, matching the official records kept by the Maesters, but there were additions in Tyrion's hand that added names and connections that appeared nowhere in any official documentation. Maester Darnell was joined in his investigation by an unexpected ally, an elderly woman named Elise, who had served House Lannister for more than 50 years. She had been a young maid when Tyrion was born, had watched him grow from a despised child into the brilliant but troubled man who would eventually become Hand of the King. Her loyalty to the family was absolute, but her knowledge of their secrets ran deeper than anyone suspected. Alice had been assigned to help Darnell with his cataloging work, ostensibly because of her familiarity with the castle's layout and the family's history. But when she saw the documents he had discovered, her reaction was immediate and telling. Her face went pale, her hands trembled slightly, and she quickly looked around to ensure they were alone before speaking in hushed tones. She had been waiting for this moment for over 20 years, she told him. Waiting for someone with the knowledge and authority to understand what these documents meant and the wisdom to handle such dangerous information carefully. She had seen Tyrion hide these materials before his departure, had helped him prepare for a journey that she knew would be far more significant than anyone else realized. The woman in the portrait, she revealed, was not just some random lover or passing fancy. She was nobility, educated and refined, from a family that had once held significant power in the Westerlands before political changes had forced them into obscurity. Her name was Alara, and she had possessed not just beauty but a brilliant mind that had matched Tyrion's own intellectual curiosity and wit. As Donal and Alice examined the materials together, they began to understand that they were looking at evidence of one of the most carefully orchestrated deceptions in the history of Westeros. This was not just about a secret romance or even a hidden marriage, but about the preservation of a bloodline that could reshape the very foundations of power in the Seven Kingdoms. The sun was setting over the Sunset Sea, casting long shadows through the windows of Tyrion's former chambers, when they made their decision to pursue this mystery wherever it might lead. They understood that they were embarking on a journey that would take them into the deepest secrets of House Lannister, secrets that had been guarded by some of the most powerful people in Westeros, for reasons they were only beginning to comprehend. The decision to uncover the truth about Alara and her connection to Tyrion was not made lightly. Maester Donal understood that pursuing such a sensitive investigation could have far-reaching consequences, not just for House Lannister, but for the delicate political balance that had been established in the aftermath of the Great War. Yet the scholar in him, the part that had spent years studying the intricate bloodlines and forgotten histories of the great houses, could not resist the pull of such a monumental mystery. Alice proved to be an invaluable partner in this endeavor. Her decades of service had given her access to information that no maester, no matter how learned, could have obtained through official channels. She knew which servants had been present during crucial moments, which chambers had been used for private meetings, and most importantly, which members of the household could be trusted with sensitive information. Their first breakthrough came when Elise led Donal to a section of Casterly Rock that few people ever visited, the ancient repositories where the oldest documents were stored. These were not the well-organized archives of recent centuries, but rather dusty chambers filled with scrolls and ledgers that dated back to the founding of House Lannister. The air was thick with age and the scent of old parchment, and each step echoed in the stone corridors like whispers from the past. Here, buried beneath layers of routine correspondence and trade agreements, they found the first piece of concrete evidence that Tyrion's secret had been known to others. It was a letter from the High Septon, dated nearly 25 years earlier, acknowledging receipt of a substantial donation to the faith from an unnamed benefactor. The donation was significant enough to warrant personal attention from the High Septon himself, and the letter contained a curious phrase about blessing a union that would remain hidden but not forgotten. More intriguing still was a response letter, written in a different hand but bearing the seal of House Lannister. This response thanked the High Septon for his discretion and promised continued support for the faith's charitable works throughout the Westerlands. The signature was not Tywin's, nor did it match any of the other Lannister family members' handwriting that Donal had studied. It was a careful, educated script that suggested nobility but remained deliberately anonymous. As they delved deeper into the archives, patterns began to emerge that painted a picture of careful planning and meticulous secrecy. There were shipping records showing regular payments to a trading company based in Braavos, payments that continued for several years and then stopped abruptly. There were land grants made to minor houses in the Westerlands, grants that seemed unusually generous for the services supposedly rendered. Most telling of all were the adoption records, legal documents that showed several noble children being taken in by different families throughout the Western lands during the same general time period. Alice revealed that she had been present for many of the private conversations between Tywin and his most trusted advisors during that time. She had served wine and cleared tables, invisible as servants often are to the nobility, but her ears had been sharp and her memory keen. She spoke of hushed discussions about protecting bloodlines, about ensuring that certain children would be raised with honor despite the circumstances of their birth, and about the importance of maintaining plausible explanations for generous acts that might otherwise raise uncomfortable questions. The old woman's eyes grew distant as she recalled those conversations, and her voice took on the cadence of someone sharing memories that had been carefully guarded for decades. She remembered Tywin speaking with surprising gentleness about a particular child, a daughter who would need to be educated properly and given every advantage despite never knowing her true heritage. The Iron Lord of Casterly Rock, a man known for his ruthless pragmatism, had shown a side of himself that few ever witnessed when discussing this secret grandchild. But perhaps the most remarkable discovery came when they found Tyrion's personal travel journals, hidden in a different location, but clearly part of the same carefully preserved collection. These journals documented his journey to Bravos during his exile, but they revealed far more than just the practical details of travel and accommodation. They showed a man falling deeply in love, perhaps for the first time in his life, with a woman who saw past his physical limitations to the brilliant mind and generous heart beneath. The entries describing Elara painted a portrait of a woman who was everything Tyrion had never dared hope to find. She was educated, having been tutored by maesters in her youth before her family's political fortunes changed. She was kind, showing genuine affection for a man whom most of Westeros viewed with suspicion or contempt. Most importantly, she was brave, willing to risk her own safety and reputation to be with someone society deemed unworthy of love. Their courtship had been conducted in secret, meeting in the Gardens of Exile, nobles who sympathized with their situation. Tyrion wrote of long conversations about philosophy and history, of shared laughter over books and wine, of the joy he felt in having found someone who appreciated his wit without fearing his family name. The journal entries from this period showed a side of Tyrion that even his closest allies rarely saw, vulnerable and hopeful in ways that made the tragedy of their separation all the more poignant. The marriage ceremony itself had been arranged through contacts in the faith who understood the importance of discretion. It was conducted in a private chapel used by exiled nobility, witnessed by only a handful of trusted individuals who swore oaths to keep the secret. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, binding two people who had found love in circumstances that made such happiness seem impossible. But even as they celebrated their union, both Tyrion and Elara understood that their happiness was temporary. The political realities of Westeros meant that their marriage could never be publicly acknowledged, and any children from their union would face dangers that could only be mitigated through the most careful planning. They had perhaps 6 months together before circumstances forced them to make the heartbreaking decision to separate for the safety of all involved. Reading these journal entries, Donald began to understand the depth of sacrifice that had been required to protect this secret. This was not simply a matter of hiding an inconvenient relationship, but rather a complex web of deception designed to ensure that an innocent child could live a normal life while still maintaining her rightful place in the Lannister succession. The more he learned, the more he realized that what they had discovered was not just a family secret, but a testament to the power of love to inspire extraordinary acts of protection and devotion. The weight of this knowledge was both exhilarating and terrifying. They were uncovering a story that could reshape understanding of the Lannister legacy, but they were also dealing with information that powerful people had gone to great lengths to keep hidden. As the days passed and their investigation deepened, both Donald and Elise began to sense that they were not the only ones interested in these long-buried secrets. The breakthrough they had been hoping for came from an unexpected source. While examining the shipping records more carefully, Donald noticed that the payments to the Bravosi Trading Company had not stopped abruptly as they first appeared, but had instead been redirected through a different merchant house based in Old Town. This discovery led them to investigate the connections between various trading enterprises and noble houses throughout Westeros, revealing a network of financial relationships that seemed designed to obscure the true source and destination of significant sums of gold. Alice suggested they examine the personal effects of other family members who might have been involved in maintaining this elaborate deception. Her intimate knowledge of the castle's hidden spaces proved invaluable once again, as she led Donald to chambers that had belonged to Kevan Lannister, Tywin's younger brother and most trusted advisor. Unlike Tyrion's quarters, which had been sealed and preserved, Kevan's rooms had been cleared after his death, but Alice knew of secret compartments that the undertakers had missed. In a hidden drawer built into the back of an ornate writing desk, they found correspondence that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy to protect Tyrion's daughter. Kevan had been deeply involved in the arrangements, serving as an intermediary between Tywin and the various noble houses that had agreed to participate in the deception. His letters showed a man who initially had reservations about the elaborate scheme, but had gradually come to understand its necessity and even its wisdom. One letter in particular stood out, written in Kevan's careful script to a Lord Brax of Hornvale. The letter discussed arrangements for a young woman who would be joining the Brax household as a ward, bringing with her a substantial dowry that would help restore the family's fortunes after losses suffered during recent conflicts. The letter emphasized that the young woman was to be treated with the utmost respect and given every opportunity to develop her considerable talents, particularly her remarkable intelligence and natural leadership abilities. What made this letter especially significant was its date, which corresponded exactly with the time when Tyrion's daughter would have been old enough to require formal education and introduction to noble society. The arrangement described was not a temporary fostering, but a permanent placement that would provide the child with a legitimate noble identity, while ensuring she received the education and social connections appropriate to her true station. Further investigation revealed that Lord Brax had indeed taken in a ward during that period, a young woman named Mira, who had supposedly been orphaned when her parents died in a plague that swept through some of the smaller settlements in the Westerlands. The official records showed that she had been a model ward, excelling in her studies and demonstrating the kind of quick wit and strategic thinking that marked her as exceptional even among the nobility. But the most remarkable discovery was yet to come. Hidden among Kevan's papers was a detailed genealogical analysis, clearly prepared by a maester learned in such matters, that traced the bloodlines of House Lannister through multiple generations. This document was far more comprehensive than anything in the official archives, including information about cadet branches, bastard lines, and marriage connections that had been overlooked or deliberately obscured in other records. According to this analysis, if Tyrion's daughter had been legitimately born within wedlock, her claim to Casterly Rock would supersede those of any other potential heirs. The document explained in careful detail how the ancient laws of inheritance worked, particularly in cases where the direct male line had been broken or complicated by unusual circumstances. The analysis concluded with a note in Kevan's handwriting that this information was to be preserved but never acted upon unless circumstances made it absolutely necessary for the survival of House Lannister. As they studied this genealogical analysis, Donald began to understand why Tywin had been willing to orchestrate such an elaborate deception to protect his secret granddaughter. This was not simply about family affection or even guilt over his treatment of Tyrion, but about ensuring the continuation of the Lannister bloodline through the most capable available heir. The document made it clear that Tywin had recognized exceptional qualities in this child that made her worthy of protection regardless of the circumstances of her birth. The investigation took on new urgency when they discovered encrypted correspondence between Kevan and various maesters throughout the Westerlands. These letters, written in a code that took Donald considerable time to decipher, discussed regular reports on the progress and development of several young people who were being monitored from a distance. The reports were detailed and comprehensive, covering not just academic achievement but also character assessment, leadership potential, and what the maesters carefully termed suitability for future responsibilities. One set of reports stood out from all the others, describing a young woman whose intelligence and natural authority impressed everyone who encountered her. The maesters wrote of her ability to solve complex problems, her talent for understanding and managing people, and her instinctive grasp of political situations that would challenge much older and more experienced nobles. Most remarkably, they noted that she seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to inspire loyalty and trust in those around her, a quality that reminded them of the greatest Lannister leaders from history. These reports continued for several years, tracking the young woman's development from childhood through adolescence and into early adulthood. They documented her marriage to a minor noble house, her successful management of her husband's lands during his absence on various duties, and her role in negotiating several important trade agreements that brought prosperity to the region. Throughout all of these achievements, the reports emphasized that she remained completely unaware of her true heritage, believing herself to be exactly who she had always been told she was. The final pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place when they found records of the substantial dowries and marriage portions that had been provided for several young women during the same general time period. These financial arrangements were far more generous than would have been expected for wards or distant relatives, suggesting that someone with considerable resources had been ensuring that these young women would be able to make advantageous marriages and establish themselves securely in noble society. But it was the discovery of a particular marriage contract that provided the most shocking revelation of all. Hidden among the routine legal documents was a marriage agreement for Mira Brax, the young woman who had been Lord Brax's ward. The contract was notable not just for its generous terms, but for the witnesses who had signed it, including several lords who had no obvious connection to House Brax, but who had all, at various times, received significant financial support from unnamed benefactors. The pattern was becoming unmistakable. What they were looking at was not a simple case of a hidden child being provided for, but rather a comprehensive network of noble houses that had been coordinated to ensure that Tyrion's daughter would not just survive, but thrive. She had been given everything necessary to become a formidable lady in her own right, educated and connected, and financially secure, all while remaining completely ignorant of the truth about her parentage. As the scope of this elaborate deception became clear, both Donal and Arliss began to realize that they were dealing with something far more significant than a family secret. This was a masterpiece of political planning that had taken years to implement and had required the cooperation of dozens of people across multiple noble houses. The question that remained was whether this network of protection was still active, and what would happen if the truth about Mira's identity were to be revealed. With the discovery of Mira Brax's identity, Donal felt a surge of satisfaction that suggested their investigation had reached its natural conclusion. Here was the hidden daughter, successfully protected and thriving under her assumed identity, married to a respectable lord and managing her responsibilities with the kind of brilliance that clearly marked her as Tyrion's child. The elaborate network of protection had worked exactly as intended, keeping her safe while ensuring she developed into the kind of leader who could honor the Lannister name if the truth were ever revealed. The evidence seemed overwhelming and conclusive. The timing of her placement with House Brax corresponded perfectly with when Tyrion's daughter would have needed protection. The financial arrangements matched the resources that Tywin would have had available. The reports from the Maesters documented exactly the kind of exceptional intelligence and leadership ability that would be expected from someone carrying Lannister blood. Most convincingly, her current position as the wife of a minor lord provided exactly the kind of secure but unremarkable life that would have been the goal of such an elaborate deception. Alice seemed to share his satisfaction with this conclusion, nodding approvingly as they reviewed the evidence they had assembled. She spoke warmly of what she remembered hearing about House Brax during the relevant time period, confirming that they had indeed taken in a ward under circumstances that matched what the documents revealed. The old woman's relief was palpable as she described how pleased she was to know that Tyrion's daughter had not only survived but had built a successful life for herself. For several days, both Donal and Alice operated under the assumption that their investigation had been successful. They began making plans for how to document their findings and what steps might need to be taken to preserve this information for future generations. The secret had been uncovered, the mystery solved, and the hidden daughter identified. It was a satisfying conclusion to what had been a complex and challenging investigation. But even as they celebrated their success, small details began to nag at Donald's scholarly mind. There were inconsistencies in the timeline that seemed minor at first, but became more troubling the more he thought about them. The reports from the Maesters, while detailed and comprehensive, contained certain phrases and observations that seemed oddly repetitive, as if they had been composed according to some kind of template, rather than representing genuine individual assessments. More puzzling still were certain financial records that didn't quite align with the story they had constructed. The payments to various noble houses had continued long after Mira's marriage and establishment as a lady in her own right, suggesting that the network of protection was supporting more than just one hidden daughter. There were references to other wards and fostered children, other advantageous marriages and generous dowries that implied a much broader scope of activity than would have been necessary for protecting a single child. Alilis noticed his growing unease, and gently questioned whether something was troubling him about their conclusions. When he shared his concerns, she fell silent for a long moment, her weathered face showing the kind of internal struggle that suggested she knew more than she had initially revealed. Finally, she admitted that while she was certain Mira Brax was connected to the secret they were investigating, she had always sensed that there were layers to this mystery that even she, with all her years of service and observation, had never fully understood. The old woman's admission opened up possibilities that neither of them had previously considered. What if the elaborate deception they had uncovered was not simply about protecting one hidden daughter, but about something much more complex and far-reaching? What if the network of noble houses and financial arrangements represented not the solution to their mystery, but merely the first layer of a much deeper conspiracy? This possibility became more compelling when they discovered additional correspondence hidden in yet another secret compartment, this one concealed behind a loose stone in the wall of Tywin's private study. These letters were different from anything they had found before, written in Tywin's own hand, but addressed to recipients whose identities were concealed behind coded references. The tone of these letters was more urgent and concerned than the careful planning documents they had found elsewhere, suggesting that even the master manipulator himself had been dealing with complications and uncertainties that threatened his carefully laid plans. One letter in particular stood out, written in what appeared to be Tywin's final years, and expressing frustration with developments that had not proceeded according to his original intentions. He wrote of contingencies that had become necessary, of backup plans that needed to be implemented, and of the growing complexity of maintaining multiple deceptions simultaneously. Most intriguingly, he referred to decisions that would need to be made by future generations, suggesting that the full scope of his planning extended far beyond his own lifetime. The letter concluded with a passage that sent chills through both investigators. Tywin wrote that the greatest challenge was not in protecting what had been hidden, but in ensuring that when the time came for revelation, those involved would be able to distinguish between the deceptions that had served their purpose and the truths that still needed to be preserved. He warned that the network he had created was so complex that even those within it might not fully understand which elements were genuine and which were merely misdirection designed to protect the real secrets. As the implications of this discovery sank in, Darnell realized that what they had assumed was the conclusion of their investigation might actually be only the beginning. If Tywin had been operating multiple layers of deception simultaneously, then Mira Brax might indeed be connected to the conspiracy, but not in the way they had assumed. She might be one of several protected individuals, or she might even be a deliberate misdirection designed to draw attention away from the real hidden daughter. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. If their initial conclusion had been incorrect, then somewhere in Westeros there was still a young woman who possessed the rightful claim to Casterly Rock, a woman who might be living a completely different life under circumstances they hadn't even begun to investigate. The scope of the mystery had suddenly expanded beyond anything they had imagined, and they found themselves facing the daunting prospect of starting their investigation anew with the understanding that nothing they had discovered could be taken at face value. Alyssa voiced what they were both thinking when she observed that if Tywin Lannister had indeed created such an elaborate web of deception, then unraveling it would require not just scholarly investigation, but the kind of political insight and strategic thinking that had made him the most formidable lord in Westeros. They were no longer simply uncovering a family secret, but attempting to outmaneuver the greatest political mind of his generation, even from beyond the grave. The realization that their investigation was far from over brought with it a mixture of excitement and apprehension. They had solved one mystery only to discover that it was part of a much larger puzzle, one that would challenge every assumption they had made about the Lannister family and the true nature of power in Westeros. As they prepared to delve deeper into this labyrinth of secrets and deceptions, both understood that they were embarking on a journey that would test not only their investigative skills, but their ability to navigate the dangerous waters of political intrigue that continued to swirl around the great houses long after the wars had ended. The revelation that their investigation had only scratched the surface of Tywin's elaborate schemes sent Donal and Ulis deeper into the labyrinthine archives of Casterly Rock than either had ever ventured before. The ancient fortress contained chambers that had been sealed for generations, rooms filled with documents that predated even the War of the Five Kings and stretched back through centuries of Lannister rule. It was in these forgotten depths that they hoped to find the truth that had been so carefully concealed beneath layers of misdirection and false trails. Alis led them through passages that few living people knew existed, corridors carved from the living rock that wound through the heart of the mountain like veins of gold through stone. The air grew cooler and more still as they descended, and the flickering light of their torches cast dancing shadows on walls that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless Lannister ambitions. These were the true heart chambers of Casterly Rock, where the most sensitive family business had been conducted for over 1,000 years. In a vault sealed behind iron doors that bore the ancient three-headed dragon seal of old Valyria, they discovered archives that revealed the true depth of Tywin's long-term planning. These were not simply records of financial transactions or political correspondence, but comprehensive studies of bloodlines, inheritance laws, and succession possibilities that stretched across multiple great houses throughout Westeros. The documents showed that Tywin had been thinking not just about his immediate family, but about the future stability of the entire realm. Among these ancient papers, they found genealogical charts that made the earlier documents seem simple by comparison. These traced not just the direct Lannister line, but every cadet branch, every marriage alliance, and every potential claim that might arise in various political scenarios. What became clear was that Tywin had identified several potential crises that could threaten not just his own house, but the stability of the Westerlands and beyond. His planning had been designed to ensure that no matter what political upheavals occurred, there would always be capable Lannister heirs positioned to maintain order and prosperity. The most significant discovery came when they found evidence of Tywin's collaboration with the Citadel itself. Hidden among the routine correspondence were letters from Archmaester Pycelle and other senior maesters that revealed an ongoing project to identify and educate potential leaders throughout the realm. This was not simply about protecting Tyrion's daughter, but about ensuring that the next generation of nobility would be prepared for the challenges that Tywin foresaw coming to Westeros. These letters spoke of a generation of young people who had been carefully selected for their exceptional abilities and provided with opportunities that would allow them to develop their talents fully. Some had been placed with great houses as wards or fostered children, others had been sent to study at the Citadel or with respected septons, and still others had been given positions that would allow them to gain practical experience in governance and leadership. All had been supported by anonymous benefactors whose generosity ensured that financial constraints would never limit their potential. What made this project even more remarkable was its scope. The Maester's letters revealed that similar networks existed throughout all 7 kingdoms, each tailored to the specific political and cultural challenges of different regions. In the north, young people were being prepared to deal with the unique challenges of ruling a vast and sparsely populated territory. In Dawn, the focus was on diplomatic skills and the complex relationships between the various noble houses. In the Reach, emphasis was placed on managing agricultural resources and trade relationships. But it was the Westerlands network that had received the most attention and resources, and it was here that the connection to Tyrion's daughter became both more complex and more significant than they had initially understood. The documents revealed that there were indeed multiple young women who had been protected and educated as part of this broader project, each positioned to serve different roles depending on how political circumstances developed. As they studied these records more carefully, a pattern began to emerge that was both elegant and terrifying in its implications. Tywin had not simply hidden one daughter and created one false identity, but had established an entire generation of potential heirs and leaders who could step forward when needed. Some were legitimate children whose true parentage had been concealed. Others were exceptionally talented individuals who had been given the resources and education necessary to serve as capable regents or advisors, and still others were decoys designed to confuse potential enemies and protect the real assets. The peaceful interlude that followed this discovery allowed both investigators to fully absorb the magnitude of what they had uncovered. Sitting in the ancient chamber as the torches burned low, surrounded by documents that represented decades of planning and preparation, they began to understand that they were not simply investigating a family secret, but uncovering one of the most sophisticated political strategies in the history of Westeros. Talis shared memories from her decades of service that took on new meaning in light of these revelations. She spoke of the unusual number of intelligent and capable young people who had visited Casterly Rock over the years, often accompanied by minor lords or maesters who seemed unusually deferential to their young charges. She remembered conversations she had overheard between Tywin and his advisors about the importance of investing in the future, about ensuring that when the time came for change, the realm would be in capable hands. The old woman's recollections painted a picture of Casterly Rock as the hub of a vast network that extended throughout Westeros and beyond. Young people who had shown exceptional promise were quietly identified and brought into the network, where they received not just education and resources, but also careful observation and assessment. Those who proved themselves worthy were gradually given greater responsibilities and access to more sensitive information, while those who disappointed expectations found their support quietly withdrawn. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this system was how it had been designed to function independently of Tywin himself. The network had been established with such care and redundancy that it could continue operating even after his death, guided by principles and objectives that had been instilled in key participants rather than dependent on central control. This explained how the protection of Tyrion's daughter had continued seamlessly even through the chaos of the recent wars. The implications of this discovery were staggering. If Tywin had indeed created such a comprehensive network of trained and positioned leaders throughout Westeros, then the political landscape of the realm was far different from what most people understood. Hidden beneath the obvious struggles between great houses was a shadow infrastructure of capable individuals who had been prepared to step forward when needed, ensuring stability and continuity regardless of what disasters might befall the recognized leadership. As they prepared to delve even deeper into this mystery, both Donal and Alyce understood that they were no longer simply investigating the fate of one hidden daughter, but uncovering a secret that could reshape understanding of how power truly functioned in Westeros. The question was no longer just who Tyrion's daughter was and where she could be found, but how many other secrets lay hidden within this vast network, and what role these hidden assets were intended to play in the future of the Seven Kingdoms. The weight of this knowledge was both exhilarating and overwhelming. They had stumbled upon what might be the greatest political conspiracy in the history of Westeros, a decades-long project that had shaped events from the shadows while remaining completely invisible to those who thought they understood how the Game of Thrones was played. As they gathered their materials and prepared to continue their investigation, both understood that they were no longer simply scholars uncovering historical curiosities, but discoverers of secrets that could have profound implications for the future of everyone in the realm. The discovery of Tywin's vast network of hidden protégés led Donald to examine the historical precedents that might have inspired such an ambitious undertaking. The archives of Casterly Rock contained chronicles that stretched back to the founding of House Lannister, and within these ancient records lay patterns of behavior that seemed to echo through the centuries, like whispers of wisdom passed down from generation to generation. The most striking parallel could be found in the reign of Lan the Clever himself, the legendary founder of House Lannister, who had won Casterly Rock not through conquest but through cunning and misdirection. The ancient tales spoke of how Lan had not simply taken the rock from the Casterlys, but had systematically placed his allies and supporters throughout the Westerlands, creating a network of loyalty that made his rule inevitable rather than imposed. The chronicles suggested that Lan's true genius lay not in any single deception, but in his ability to see the entire realm as a vast puzzle that could be solved through patience and careful positioning. This pattern had been repeated throughout Lannister history, though never on the scale that Tywin had achieved. During the chaotic period following the doom of Valyria, when trade routes collapsed and political alliances shifted overnight, the Lannisters had survived and prospered by maintaining hidden reserves of gold and secret agreements with houses that others had dismissed as insignificant. When the Dance of Dragons tore the realm apart, Lannister survival had depended not on choosing the winning side, but on ensuring that capable leaders would be available regardless of which faction ultimately prevailed. The more Donald studied these historical patterns, the more he began to understand that what they had discovered was not an aberration in Lannister behavior, but rather the culmination of a 1,000-year tradition of strategic thinking that looked beyond immediate circumstances to consider the long-term survival and prosperity of both house and realm. Tywin had not invented the concept of hidden networks and prepared successors, but had perfected it on a scale that previous generations could never have imagined. This understanding was deepened by a remarkable discovery that Elise made while exploring one of the most ancient chambers in Casterly Rock. Hidden behind a tapestry that depicted the submission of rebellious houses to Lan the Clever was a small alcove containing what appeared to be the personal journal of one of the early Lannister lords. The journal was written in an archaic form of the common tongue that required careful translation, but its contents proved to be extraordinarily relevant to their current investigation. The journal described what its author called the Great Preparation, a concept that seemed to encompass the idea that each generation of Lannisters had a responsibility to ensure that their successors would be equipped to handle challenges that had not yet arisen. The author wrote of maintaining multiple potential heirs, not just within the direct family line, but among allied houses and even among the small folk who showed exceptional promise. The goal was not simply to preserve House Lannister, but to ensure that the qualities that had made the house great would continue to influence the realm, regardless of what political upheavals might occur. What made this journal particularly significant was its description of techniques for identifying and developing talent that seemed remarkably similar to the methods Tywin had employed centuries later. The author wrote of the importance of observing young people in various circumstances to assess not just their obvious abilities, but their character under pressure, their capacity for growth, and their potential to inspire loyalty in others. Most intriguingly, the journal described a systematic approach to placing promising individuals in positions where they could develop their skills while remaining connected to the broader Lannister network. The parallels between these ancient methods and Tywin's modern implementation was so striking that Donald began to wonder whether there might be hidden records that had been passed down through generations of Lannister lords, knowledge that was too sensitive to include in official histories, but too valuable to lose entirely. This possibility led them to search for evidence of other secret traditions within the house, customs and practices that might have been maintained across centuries without ever being formally documented. Their search was rewarded when they discovered what appeared to be a collection of private instructions written by various Lannister lords for their heirs and hidden in locations throughout Casterly Rock that only family members would know to examine. These instructions, spanning several centuries, revealed that the practice of maintaining hidden networks and prepared successors had indeed been passed down as a family tradition, with each generation adapting the basic principles to meet the specific challenges of their time. The instructions from Tywin's grandfather were particularly illuminating, as they described preparations that had been made to deal with the potential consequences of the Targaryen dynasty's increasing instability. These preparations had included not just financial arrangements and political alliances, but the careful positioning of individuals who could serve as intermediaries between the great houses if civil war erupted. The success of these preparations could be seen in how House Lannister had navigated the complex politics of Robert's rebellion, emerging not just intact but stronger than before. But it was Tywin's own instructions, apparently written for Shaimi before the events that would make such conventional succession impossible, that provided the most insight into the thinking behind the network they had discovered. Tywin had written of his recognition that the realm was entering a period of unprecedented instability, with threats arising not just from political conflicts, but from fundamental changes in the nature of power itself. The rise of religious fundamentalism, the return of magic to the world, and the increasing unpredictability of dragon lords and their ambitions all represented challenges that traditional approaches to leadership might not be adequate to address. In response to these emerging threats, Tywin had expanded the ancient Lannister tradition of hidden preparation to an unprecedented scale. Rather than simply ensuring the survival of his own house, he had undertaken to prepare an entire generation of leaders who could guide Westeros through whatever upheavals lay ahead. The network of protégés and hidden heirs represented not just a backup plan for House Lannister, but a shadow government ready to emerge when the official structures of power proved inadequate to the challenges they faced. Understanding this broader context helped explain why the protection of Tyrion's daughter had been integrated into such a vast and complex system. She was not simply a family member who needed to be kept safe, but a potential leader who represented the best qualities of the Lannister bloodline and who might someday be needed to guide the realm through crises that had not yet emerged. Her education and positioning were part of a much larger strategy that encompassed dozens of similarly prepared individuals, each positioned to serve different roles depending on how future events unfolded. As the implications of this discovery settled over them, both Donald and Elise began to appreciate the true scope of the mystery they were investigating. They were not simply trying to identify one hidden daughter, but to understand a system of governance that operated entirely in the shadows, preparing for contingencies that the official rulers of Westeros could not even imagine. The question was no longer just who Tyrion's daughter was, but how she fit into this larger pattern, and what role she was ultimately intended to play in the future of the realm. The weight of this ancient tradition, spanning 1,000 years of Lannister history and culminating in Tywin's unprecedented expansion of the concept, created a sense of destiny and purpose that made their investigation feel like more than academic curiosity. They were uncovering secrets that connected the founding legends of House Lannister to the political realities of the present day, revealing patterns of wisdom and preparation that had shaped the history of Westeros from the shadows for centuries. The breakthrough that would reshape their entire understanding of the investigation came from an unexpected source. While examining the ancient instructions left by previous Lannister lords, Donnell noticed subtle references to what appeared to be a secondary archive, a collection of documents that was kept separate from even the most secret family records. These references were cryptic, referring only to the true accounting and records of the deepest oaths, but they appeared consistently enough to suggest that such an archive actually existed. Alice had heard whispers of such a place during her years of service, stories told by the oldest servants about chambers that even they were forbidden to enter, rooms that were tended only by members of the family themselves or by individuals whose loyalty had been tested beyond any possible doubt. The existence of such a place had always seemed like the kind of legend that accumulated around ancient castles, but the documentary evidence they had found suggested that it might be more than mere servants' tales. The search for this hidden archive led them deeper into Casterly rock than either had ever imagined possible, through passages that seemed to have been carved not just from stone, but from the very gold veins that ran through the mountain. The air itself seemed to shimmer in the torchlight, and the walls bore carvings that were far older and more intricate than anything in the main sections of the castle. These were chambers that predated not just the current castle, but possibly even the original Lannister occupation, spaces that had been sacred to the Casterlys and had been preserved and expanded by their conquerors. In the deepest chamber they could find, behind walls that required knowledge of specific pressure points and hidden mechanisms to access, they discovered what could only be described as the true heart of Lannister power. This was not simply an archive, but a shrine to the continuity of the house, containing not just documents but artifacts that represented the most sacred traditions and deepest secrets of nearly 1,000 years of rule. The documents in this chamber were unlike anything they had found before. These were not copies or summaries, but original records of events that had shaped not just House Lannister, but the entire history of Westeros. Among them were marriage contracts that revealed the true parentage of several major historical figures, financial records that showed how various wars and political crises had been influenced or even orchestrated, and correspondence that revealed the existence of alliances and enmities that had remained hidden for centuries. But the most significant discovery was a series of detailed reports that documented the implementation of what Tywin had called the Restoration Project. These reports revealed that the network of hidden protégés and prepared successors was far more advanced and successful than even their previous discoveries had suggested. The project had not simply placed talented individuals in various positions throughout the realm, but had created an entire shadow infrastructure of governance that was ready to emerge whenever the official structures of power failed. The reports documented dozens of success stories, young people who had been identified early for their exceptional abilities and who had been carefully guided into positions of influence and responsibility. Some had become trusted advisors to major lords, others had married into important families and were influencing policy from within, and still others had taken on roles in the Faith or the Citadel, where they could shape the intellectual and spiritual development of the realm. What made these reports truly remarkable was their documentation of how these individuals had performed during the recent crises that had shaken Westeros. During Robert's Rebellion, the War of the Five Kings, and the conflicts that followed, members of the network had consistently emerged as voices of reason and stability, helping to minimize damage and preserve continuity even when official leadership failed. The reports showed that many of the positive outcomes that had been attributed to luck or individual heroism had actually been the result of careful positioning and preparation that stretched back decades. Among all these success stories, one stood out as exceptional even by the standards of this remarkable project. The reports described a young woman whose capabilities had exceeded every expectation, who had not only mastered the skills and knowledge that had been provided to her, but had independently developed insights and abilities that impressed even the most experienced observers. The The reports noted that she had been given increasingly challenging responsibilities and had consistently exceeded expectations, demonstrating the kind of natural leadership and political instinct that marked her as potentially the most successful product of the entire restoration project. The woman described in these reports was not Mira Brax, whose achievements, while impressive, paled in comparison to this individual's accomplishments. This was someone who had been placed in a position of genuine power and responsibility, someone who had already proven her ability to govern effectively and inspire loyalty among both nobles and common people. The report suggested that she had become one of the most capable administrators in Westeros, though her true heritage remained unknown even to herself. What made this revelation even more significant was the discovery that this woman's placement had been the subject of special attention from Tywin himself. Unlike the other members of the network, whose development had been overseen by various trusted agents, her progress had been monitored directly by the Lord of Casterly Rock. The reports showed that Tywin had taken personal interest in her education and development, suggesting that she represented something more than just another talented individual who might prove useful to the realm. The truth became clear when they found the final piece of evidence they had been seeking, a document that revealed the identity of Tyrion's daughter and her current position. She had been placed not as a minor ward or forgotten relative, but as the wife of a lord whose lands were strategically crucial to the stability of Westeros. More remarkably, she had been positioned in such a way that her influence extended far beyond her official role, making her one of the most powerful women in the realm despite the fact that few people understood the true source of her authority. The revelation that Tyrion's daughter was not living in obscurity, but was actually one of the most successful rulers in Westeros, created a complex mix of emotions for both investigators. On one hand, they were relieved to discover that she had not only survived, but had thrived beyond anyone's most optimistic expectations. On the other hand, they began to understand that revealing her true identity could have consequences that extended far beyond personal or family considerations. The reports made it clear that her current position was not accidental, but was the culmination of decades of careful planning and preparation. She had been educated specifically for the role she now occupied, trained in the skills and knowledge necessary to succeed in her position, and provided with the resources and connections needed to maximize her effectiveness. Most importantly, she had been positioned in such a way that her natural abilities could develop fully while remaining protected from the political dangers that would have threatened her if her true heritage had been known. Understanding the true scope of her achievements and the importance of her current role forced both Donal and Alyce to confront difficult questions about whether their investigation should continue. They had found what they were looking for, but in doing so they had discovered that the truth was far more complex and significant than they had imagined. The woman they had been seeking was not a victim who needed rescue or a secret that needed revelation, but a leader whose effectiveness depended partly on the mystery that surrounded her origins. As they absorbed the implications of this discovery, both investigators began to realize that their investigation had evolved far beyond its original purpose. They were no longer simply uncovering a hidden family secret, but were documenting one of the most sophisticated and successful political strategies in the history of Westeros. The question was no longer just who Tyrion's daughter was, but what responsibility they bore for the knowledge they had gained, and how it should be used to serve the greater good of the realm. The revelation that Tyrion's daughter had achieved such remarkable success, while remaining completely unaware of her true heritage, led Donal and Alyce to examine the most sensitive documents in the hidden archive, records that detailed not just the implementation of the restoration project, but its ultimate purpose and the specific role that each member of the network was intended to play in the future governance of Westeros. These documents revealed a level of strategic thinking that went far beyond anything they had previously imagined. A comprehensive plan for reshaping the political landscape of the realm in ways that would ensure stability and prosperity for generations to come. The deepest truth, carefully encoded in documents that required multiple keys and passwords to access, was that Tywin had recognized something that few other lords of his generation had understood. The traditional structures of feudal governance that had served Westeros for centuries were becoming inadequate to address the challenges that the realm would face in the coming age. The increasing complexity of trade and finance, the growing importance of knowledge and technology, and the changing nature of warfare itself all required new approaches to leadership that the established noble houses were not equipped to provide. In response to this recognition, Tywin had conceived and implemented what amounted to a peaceful revolution, a systematic replacement of ineffective leadership with individuals who had been specifically prepared for the challenges they would face. The network of protégés and hidden heirs was not simply a backup plan for maintaining existing power structures, but a means of gradually transitioning the realm to new forms of governance that would be more effective and more just than what had come before. The documents revealed that this transition had been underway for decades so gradually and subtly that even most of the participants were unaware of the broader pattern. Young people who had been identified for their exceptional abilities had been placed in positions where they could gain experience and prove themselves, while older leaders who had demonstrated incompetence or corruption had found their influence gradually diminished through circumstances that appeared entirely natural. The result was a realm that was slowly but steadily becoming better governed, even as the official structures of power appeared to remain unchanged. Tyrion's daughter occupied a special place within this grand design, not simply as another talented individual who had been given opportunities to succeed, but as someone who embodied the principles and values that Tywin hoped would guide the future development of Westeros. The reports described her as possessing not just intelligence and administrative skill, but a rare combination of pragmatism and idealism that made her capable of implementing necessary changes while maintaining the stability and continuity that the realm required. Her current position was revealed to be far more significant than even the previous documents had suggested. She was not simply the wife of an important lord, but had effectively become the primary administrator for a region that encompassed several major house territories and countless smaller holdings. Her influence extended through a network of alliances and agreements that made her one of the most powerful figures in Westeros, though her power was exercised so skillfully and diplomatically that few people recognized its true extent. The documents showed that she had implemented reforms and improvements that had transformed her region from one of the more troubled areas of the realm into a model of effective governance. She had established new approaches to justice that balanced traditional laws with practical considerations, created economic policies that promoted both prosperity and fairness, and developed diplomatic relationships that had helped to prevent conflicts that might otherwise have escalated into serious problems for the realm as a whole. What made her achievements even more remarkable was that she had accomplished all of this while remaining completely unaware of the resources and support that had been provided to help her succeed. The network that had been established to assist her operated so discreetly that she believed her successes were entirely the result of her own efforts and the cooperation of people who supported her ideas on their own merits. This was precisely what Tywin had intended, ensuring that her leadership would be authentic and sustainable rather than dependent on external manipulation. The third and most sensitive revelation contained in these deepest archives concerned the ultimate purpose of the Restoration Project and the specific crisis that Tywin had anticipated would require such extensive preparation. The documents revealed that Tywin had possessed intelligence about threats to the realm that went far beyond the political conflicts that had dominated recent years. He had been aware of the potential return of magic to the world, the possibility of invasion from beyond the Narrow Sea, and most significantly, the likelihood that the traditional great houses would prove incapable of responding effectively to such unprecedented challenges. The network of prepared leaders that he had established was designed to function as a shadow government that could emerge when the official structures of power failed, providing continuity of governance and leadership during periods of crisis that might otherwise result in complete collapse. The positioning of various network members had been carefully planned to ensure that every major region of Westeros would have capable leadership available, regardless of what happened to the recognized noble houses. Tyrion's daughter's role within this contingency planning was particularly crucial because her region occupied a strategic position that would be essential for coordinating responses to major threats. Her territory controlled key transportation routes, possessed significant military resources, and maintained diplomatic relationships with houses throughout the realm that would be necessary for organizing effective resistance to external threats or internal collapse. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this planning was its recognition that the greatest challenges facing Westeros would require not just capable leadership, but fundamental changes in how the realm understood concepts like legitimacy, authority, and governance itself. The traditional emphasis on bloodlines and inherited titles had created a system where power often fell to individuals who were unprepared for its responsibilities, while truly capable leaders were excluded from influence because of accidents of birth. The Restoration Project represented an attempt to transition the realm to a system where leadership would be based on merit and capability, rather than just hereditary claims, but to do so gradually and peacefully, rather than through the kind of violent revolution that would devastate the people the new system was meant to serve. By placing capable individuals in positions of real authority, while maintaining the appearance of traditional structures, Tywin had hoped to demonstrate that effective governance was possible and gradually shift popular expectations and acceptance. The success of this approach could be seen in the widespread admiration and respect that Tyrion's daughter had earned in her current position. People throughout her region and beyond recognized her as an exceptional leader, but they attributed her success to her personal qualities rather than to any special advantages she might have received. This meant that her authority was based on genuine popular support and demonstrated competence rather than just inherited privilege, making it far more secure and sustainable than traditional forms of noble power. Understanding the true scope and purpose of Tywin's planning helped explain why the protection of Tyrion's daughter had been integrated into such a vast and sophisticated system. She was not simply a family member who needed to be kept safe, but a crucial component of a strategy that was intended to ensure the long-term stability and prosperity of the entire realm. Her development and success were essential not just for House Lannister, but for the future of Westeros itself. The implications of this discovery were both inspiring and overwhelming. They had uncovered evidence of one of the most ambitious and far-sighted political strategies in history, a plan that had been decades in the making, and that was already showing remarkable success in improving governance throughout the realm. At the same time, they had learned that they were in possession of information that could fundamentally alter the political landscape of Westeros if it were revealed at the wrong time or in the wrong way. As they contemplated the weight of this knowledge, both Donal and Elise began to understand that their investigation had evolved far beyond academic curiosity or even family loyalty. They had become custodians of secrets that could shape the future of millions of people, and the responsibility for deciding how to use this knowledge was both an honor and a burden that would require the most careful consideration. The question was no longer just about revealing the truth, but about ensuring that the truth would serve the greater good of the realm and the people whose lives would be affected by whatever decisions they made. The magnitude of their discoveries forced Donal and Elise to acknowledge that they could no longer pursue their investigation alone. The secrets they had uncovered were too significant and too complex for two individuals to fully understand or responsibly manage. They needed guidance from others who possessed the knowledge and wisdom necessary to help them navigate the political and moral complexities of their situation, individuals who could be trusted with information that could reshape the future of Westeros. Their first consultation was with Maester Samwell Tarly, whose unique combination of scholarly expertise and political experience made him an ideal advisor for their extraordinary circumstances. Sam had served as Grand Maester during some of the most turbulent periods in recent history, and his understanding of both the theoretical principles of governance and the practical realities of political power provided insights that proved invaluable for understanding the full implications of what they had discovered. When they presented their findings to Sam, his reaction was a mixture of amazement and recognition that suggested he had been aware of at least some aspects of what they had uncovered. He revealed that during his time in King's Landing, he had noticed patterns in the recommendations and advice he received from various sources that seemed almost too well coordinated to be coincidental. Lords and advisors from different regions had consistently offered similar solutions to complex problems, and their approaches had shown a level of sophistication and long-term thinking that went beyond what he would have expected from individuals working independently. Sam's analysis of their evidence confirmed what they had begun to suspect about the scope and success of the restoration project. He was able to identify specific policies and initiatives that had been implemented throughout the realm that bore the hallmarks of the coordinated approach they had discovered in the Lannister archives. The gradual improvement in governance that had characterized the post-war period was not simply the result of lessons learned from recent conflicts, but reflected the emergence of a new generation of leaders who had been specifically prepared for their roles. More significantly, Sam was able to provide context for understanding why such a project had been necessary and why it had been implemented with such extraordinary secrecy. He explained that the traditional great houses had become increasingly unable to adapt to changing circumstances, locked into patterns of behavior that served their short-term interests but were counterproductive for the long-term stability of the realm. The restoration project represented a recognition that fundamental changes were needed, but that such changes could only be implemented gradually and carefully to avoid the kind of violent upheaval that would cause more problems than it solved. Their second consultation was with Lady Olenna Tyrell's former advisor, an elderly woman named Septa Mordane, who had spent decades observing the political machinations of the great houses and who possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of the relationships and alliances that shaped the realm's governance. Septa Mordane's insights proved particularly valuable for understanding the network aspects of what they had discovered and for identifying other individuals who might be connected to the broader project. Septa Mordane revealed that she had long suspected the existence of some kind of coordination between certain houses and individuals, based on patterns she had observed in marriage alliances, trade agreements, and political appointments that seemed to serve broader strategic purposes beyond the immediate interests of the parties involved. She had noticed that certain young people seemed to receive opportunities and support that went beyond what their official family connections would have warranted, and that these individuals consistently proved to be exceptionally capable in their assigned roles. Her analysis helped them understand how the network had been structured to maintain security while ensuring effective communication and coordination, rather than operating as a centralized organization that could be discovered and disrupted. The project had been designed as a series of overlapping relationships and mutual obligations that appeared entirely natural from the outside. Members of the network often served multiple functions and reported to different individuals depending on the specific nature of their activities, creating redundancy and resilience that made the system extremely difficult to compromise. The most valuable consultation came from an unexpected source, a former advisor to Tywin Lannister named Maester Cresson, who had been thought dead but had actually been living in retirement in a remote monastery in the Reach. Alessad remembered hearing references to this individual in some of the documents they had discovered, and their investigation had revealed that he had played a crucial role in the early planning and implementation of the restoration project. Maester Cresson's knowledge proved to be the key to understanding many of the details that had remained mysterious in the documents they had found. He had been present for many of the original conversations between Tywin and other senior figures who had helped design the project, and his memories provided crucial context for understanding the motivations and objectives that had guided their planning. Most importantly, he was able to confirm their conclusions about Tyrion's daughter's identity and current position, as he had been directly involved in arranging her placement and early education. The old maester's emotional response to learning that their investigation had been successful was deeply moving. He spoke of the years of uncertainty and worry that had followed Tywin's death, wondering whether the network would continue to function effectively without his guiding presence, and whether the individuals they had worked so hard to prepare would be able to fulfill their intended roles. Learning that Tyrion's daughter had not only survived but had achieved such remarkable success validated decades of careful planning and sacrifice. Maester Cresson also provided crucial information about the current state of the network and the challenges it faced in the changed political environment of post-war Westeros. He explained that many of the project's original objectives had been achieved more successfully than anyone had dared hope, but that new challenges had emerged that required adaptations to the original plan. The return of magic to the world, the changing nature of international relationships, and the evolving expectations of the common people all presented opportunities and threats that the original planners had not fully anticipated. Most significantly, he confirmed that the time was approaching when some of the network's hidden assets would need to emerge from the shadows and take on more visible leadership roles. The gradual transition that had been the project's original strategy was nearing completion in some regions, and the success of individuals like Tyrion's daughter was creating opportunities for more dramatic changes that could accelerate the improvement of governance throughout the realm. The conversations with these wise advisors helped Donal and Alyssa understand that their investigation had uncovered not just historical secrets, but ongoing realities that continued to shape the political landscape of Westeros. The network they had discovered was not a relic of past planning, but a living system that was actively working to address current challenges and prepare for future ones. Their knowledge of its existence and operation carried with it both opportunities and responsibilities that would require careful consideration and planning. As they absorbed the guidance and wisdom they had received, both investigators began to appreciate the complexity of the choices they faced. They possessed information that could be used to advance the noble goals of the Restoration Project, but they also understood that premature or inappropriate revelation could undermine years of careful work and potentially harm the very people they hoped to help. The question was no longer simply what they should do with their knowledge, but how they could use it most effectively to serve the greater good of the realm and honor the trust that had been placed in them by the discovery of these extraordinary secrets. The weight of the knowledge they had gained began to manifest in ways that neither Donal nor Alice had anticipated. The secrets they carried seemed to cast shadows over every aspect of their daily lives, influencing how they interpreted events throughout the realm and creating a constant awareness of the hidden currents that flowed beneath the surface of official politics. What had begun as scholarly curiosity had evolved into a profound responsibility that challenged their understanding of truth, loyalty, and the proper use of dangerous knowledge. The most immediate challenge they faced was the psychological burden of knowing so much about the true nature of power in Westeros while being unable to share this knowledge with anyone except their most trusted advisors. They found themselves observing political events with insights that revealed motivations and connections that were invisible to others. But this enhanced understanding came with the isolation that always accompanies possession of secrets that cannot be safely revealed. Donal struggled particularly with the scholarly implications of their discoveries. His training as a maester had emphasized the importance of preserving and sharing knowledge for the benefit of future generations. But the information they had uncovered was so sensitive that traditional approaches to documentation and dissemination could have catastrophic consequences. He spent sleepless nights wrestling with questions about how to balance his obligations as a scholar with his responsibilities as someone who had been entrusted with secrets that could affect the lives of millions. Alyssa faced different but equally challenging dilemmas related to her decades of loyalty to House Lannister and her knowledge of the individuals whose lives would be affected by whatever decisions they made. Her emotional connection to Tyrion and her pride in his daughter's achievements created personal stakes that went beyond abstract considerations of political strategy or historical significance. She found herself torn between her desire to see justice done and recognition given where it was deserved, and her understanding that such recognition might ultimately prove harmful to the people she sought to help. The burden they carried was made heavier by their growing awareness of how their investigation had changed their relationship to the events unfolding around them. They were no longer passive observers of political developments, but had become participants whose knowledge gave them the ability to influence outcomes in ways that could have far-reaching consequences. This realization brought with it a sense of responsibility that was both empowering and overwhelming, forcing them to consider not just what they could do with their knowledge but what they should do. Their consultations with trusted advisors had provided valuable guidance, but had also revealed the complexity of the considerations that would need to inform any decisions they made about how to proceed. The advisors themselves had different perspectives on the appropriate use of sensitive information, reflecting their own experiences and priorities in ways that highlighted how difficult it would be to find solutions that would satisfy all legitimate concerns. Maester Samwell had emphasized the importance of considering the long-term consequences for the realm as a whole, arguing that the success of the restoration project was too important for the future stability of Westeros to be jeopardized by premature revelations or inappropriate interference. His perspective reflected his experience with the challenges of governance and his understanding of how easily well-intentioned actions could produce unintended consequences that caused more harm than good. Septa Mordane had focused more on the personal and family considerations involved, particularly the impact that revelations about her heritage might have on Tyrion's daughter and her ability to continue the work she had been doing so successfully. Her insights reflected a deep understanding of how personal relationships and family dynamics could influence political outcomes, and her advice emphasized the importance of considering the wishes and well-being of the individuals whose lives would be most directly affected. Maester Cresson had provided a perspective that balanced both considerations while adding the weight of his direct experience with the original planning and implementation of the project. His advice reflected an understanding of both the strategic objectives that had motivated the original planners and the human costs that had been involved in achieving those objectives. His emphasis on the importance of timing and careful preparation resonated strongly with both investigators. As they processed the guidance they had received and contemplated the choices they faced, both Donal and Elise began to experience what could only be described as omens that seemed to reflect the significance of their situation. These were not supernatural manifestations, but rather a series of coincidences and symbolic occurrences that seemed to emphasize the weight of the decisions they were contemplating. The weather itself seemed to mirror their internal struggles, with periods of clear skies alternating with sudden storms that appeared and disappeared without warning. The ancient stones of Casterly rock seemed to whisper with voices from the past, and the golden veins that ran through the mountain appeared to pulse with an inner light that reflected the precious nature of the secrets they contained. More significantly, they began to notice changes in the political landscape that suggested the network they had discovered was indeed active and responsive to current events. Lords and advisors throughout the realm seemed to be coordinating their responses to various challenges with a level of efficiency and effectiveness that went beyond what would be expected from independent decision-making. The patterns they had learned to recognize in historical documents were becoming visible in contemporary events, confirming that the system they had uncovered was not just a relic of past planning, but a living force that continued to shape the governance of Westeros. These observations created a sense of urgency that had not been present in their earlier investigations. They were not simply studying historical curiosities, but were documenting ongoing activities that could affect the immediate future of the realm. Their knowledge of the network's existence and operation gave them insights that could potentially be used to support or hinder its activities, creating a responsibility to act that was both compelling and terrifying. The most profound challenge they faced was the recognition that their investigation had reached a point where continued inaction was itself a form of action with significant consequences. Their knowledge of Tyrion's daughter's true identity and the role she was playing in the broader transformation of Westeros had created a situation where they could no longer remain neutral observers, whether they chose to reveal what they had learned, to actively support the network's activities, or to maintain their silence. Their decision would have implications that extended far beyond their personal preferences or professional obligations. As they contemplated these weighty considerations, both investigators found themselves drawn to the peaceful chambers of Casterly Rock, where they had spent so many hours uncovering the secrets that now burdened them. The ancient stones that had witnessed centuries of Lannister ambitions and achievements provided a sense of continuity and perspective that helped them understand their situation within the broader sweep of history. They were participants in a story that had been unfolding for generations and that would continue long after their own roles had been completed. The calm that settled over them during these quiet moments of reflection was not the peace of resolution, but the serenity that comes from accepting the weight of significant responsibility. They understood that the choices they faced were among the most important decisions they would ever make, and that the consequences of those choices would ripple through the lives of countless people throughout Westeros. The shadow of truth they carried was not a burden to be cast off, but a trust to be honored through careful consideration and wise action. The moment of ultimate truth arrived not through their own investigations, but through an unexpected visitor to Casterly Rock. Lady Joanna Lannister, as she was known to the world, arrived with a small retinue on what appeared to be a routine diplomatic mission to discuss trade agreements between her region and the Westerlands. To most observers, she was simply the capable wife of Lord Edmund Craighall, a woman whose intelligence and administrative skills had made her one of the most respected figures in the realm, someone whose counsel was sought by lords and ladies throughout Westeros. But to Donal and Alice, who had spent months studying every detail of her life and achievements, her presence at Casterly Rock represented something far more significant. This was Tyrion's daughter, the hidden heir whose very existence had been one of the most carefully guarded secrets in the Seven Kingdoms, standing in the halls where her father had once walked and her grandfather had once ruled, completely unaware of her true heritage and the legacy that was rightfully hers. The irony of the situation was both profound and heartbreaking. Here was a woman who possessed every quality that had made House Lannister great, who had achieved more in her relatively short life than most lords accomplished in decades of rule, who had earned the respect and admiration of people throughout the realm through her own merit and capability, yet she knew nothing of the bloodline that had shaped her character or the careful planning that had made her success possible. Observing her during the formal ceremonies and private meetings that comprised her visit, both investigators were struck by the unmistakable signs of her Lannister heritage. She possessed not just the golden hair and green eyes that marked the family bloodline, but more importantly, she demonstrated the quick wit, strategic thinking, and natural authority that had characterized the greatest Lannister leaders throughout history. When she spoke, people listened not just out of courtesy, but because her words carried the weight of wisdom and experience that commanded genuine respect. But it was during a private moment when she was examining some of the historical displays in Casterly Rock's Great Hall that the full emotional impact of their discovery became apparent. She paused before a portrait of Tyrion that had been commissioned during his time as Hand of the King, studying the painted features with an expression that suggested recognition of something she could not quite identify. For a brief moment, the resemblance between father and daughter was so striking that anyone who knew to look for it would have immediately understood the connection. The revelation that would change everything came not from any dramatic confrontation or carefully planned disclosure, but from a simple accident of timing and circumstance. Alors, who had been serving refreshments during one of the diplomatic meetings, accidentally knocked over a decorative box that had been placed on a side table. The box opened as it fell, spilling its contents across the floor, and among the scattered items was the ivory portrait of Alara that they had discovered in Tyrion's hidden compartment. Lady Joanna moved to help gather the scattered items, and when her fingers touched the portrait, her reaction was immediate and unmistakable. The color drained from her face, her hands began to tremble, and she stared at the painted image with an expression of shock and recognition that made it clear she was looking at a face she had seen before, though she could not immediately place where or when. The silence that followed stretched for what seemed like an eternity, as everyone present tried to understand what they had just witnessed. Lady Joanna continued to stare at the portrait, her brilliant mind clearly working to process implications that were almost too extraordinary to comprehend. Slowly, she raised her eyes to meet Alicey's gaze, and in that moment both women understood that a secret that had been carefully guarded for more than 20 years had finally been revealed. What followed was not the dramatic scene that might have been expected from such a momentous revelation, but rather a quiet conversation that took place in the privacy of Tyrion's former chambers, where the evidence of her true heritage could be examined and explained without the risk of unwanted observers. Lady Joanna listened to their account with the same careful attention and analytical thinking that had made her such an effective leader, asking questions that demonstrated her understanding of the political and personal implications of what she was learning. Her response to discovering her true identity was a masterpiece of the composure and wisdom that had characterized her entire life. Rather than responding with anger at the deception that had shaped her existence, or with demands for immediate recognition of her rightful heritage, she focused on understanding the motivations and circumstances that had made such elaborate secrecy necessary. She recognized that the people who had arranged her protection and education had acted out of love and wisdom rather than any desire to harm or deceive her. Most remarkably, she immediately grasped the implications of her discovery for the broader political situation in Westeros and the ongoing work of the network that had been established to improve governance throughout the realm. Her first concern was not for her own position or recognition, but for the potential impact that revelations about her heritage might have on the stability and effectiveness of the systems that had been put in place to serve the greater good. The conversation that followed was perhaps the most extraordinary political discussion in the history of Westeros, as they explored the connections between her personal story and the larger transformation that had been taking place throughout the realm. Lady Joanna's insights into the network's activities, based on her own experiences and observations, provided confirmation of its success and revealed aspects of its operation that even their extensive investigation had not uncovered. She described how she had often wondered about the unusual opportunities and support that had been provided to her throughout her life, resources and connections that had seemed remarkably well suited to her needs and ambitions. She had attributed this to good fortune and the kindness of people who recognized her potential, but now she understood that it had been part of a carefully orchestrated plan to ensure that she would be prepared for whatever challenges and responsibilities lay ahead. The revelation of her true heritage also provided context for understanding the deep sense of purpose and responsibility that had always motivated her actions. She had felt called to serve others and to work for the improvement of the realm in ways that went beyond personal ambition or family loyalty. And now she understood that this calling might have been shaped by bloodlines and traditions that stretched back through centuries of Lannister leadership. But perhaps the most profound aspect of this climactic revelation was the recognition that it marked not an ending, but a beginning. The discovery of her true identity created new possibilities and responsibilities that would need to be carefully considered and thoughtfully implemented. The network that had protected and prepared her for so many years now faced the challenge of adapting to a situation where their most carefully guarded secret had been revealed. While she faced the challenge of integrating this new knowledge into her understanding of herself and her role in the world, as the initial shock of discovery gave way to contemplation of its implications, all present understood that they were witnessing a moment that would be remembered as one of the most significant turning points in the history of Westeros. The hidden daughter had been found. The ancient prophecy about the smallest lion birthing the greatest was being fulfilled, and the future of the realm would be shaped by the wisdom and capability of someone who had proven herself worthy of the trust that had been placed in her by those who had sacrificed so much to ensure her success. The whisper that had been lost in time had indeed grown into a storm across eternity. But it was a storm that brought not destruction but transformation, not chaos but the promise of better governance, and greater justice for all the people of the Seven Kingdoms. The revelation of Lady Joanna's true identity as Tyrion's daughter created a period of careful deliberation and planning that would determine how this extraordinary knowledge would be integrated into the ongoing transformation of Westeros. Rather than rushing into dramatic announcements or immediate changes, all parties involved recognized that the success of the broader project required the same thoughtful approach that had characterized its implementation for decades. Lady Joanna's response to learning her heritage demonstrated the wisdom and maturity that had made her such an effective leader throughout her adult life. She understood that her personal desires for recognition or family connection were far less important than the potential impact of her decisions on the millions of people whose lives had been improved by the network's activities. Her primary concern was ensuring that the revelation of her identity would strengthen rather than undermine the work that had been accomplished and the goals that remained to be achieved. The first major decision that needed to be made concerned the extent to which her true heritage should be revealed to others within the network and throughout the realm. After extensive consultation with the trusted advisors who had been brought into their confidence, they concluded that a gradual approach would be most effective, beginning with key network members who needed to understand the full scope of what had been accomplished and expanding from there based on political circumstances and opportunities. The reaction of network members to learning about Lady Joanna's identity was uniformly positive, reflecting both their respect for her achievements and their understanding of the symbolic importance of her success for the broader project. Many had worked with her over the years in various capacities and had been impressed by her capabilities, but learning that she was Tyrion's daughter provided context that helped them understand the exceptional nature of her accomplishments and the significance of her role in the network's future development. Maester Cressen's emotional response to meeting her was particularly moving, as he had been directly involved in arranging her early protection and education, but had never had the opportunity to see the results of their efforts firsthand. His joy at witnessing her success and his pride in the woman she had become validated decades of careful planning and sacrifice, demonstrating that the most ambitious aspects of the restoration project had indeed achieved their intended goals. The integration of Lady Joanna's true identity into the network's ongoing activities opened up new possibilities for advancing the project's objectives throughout Westeros. Her established relationships with lords and ladies throughout the realm, combined with her proven track record of effective leadership, positioned her to play an even more significant role in promoting the kinds of governance reforms that the network had been working to implement. Perhaps most importantly, her example demonstrated that the transition from traditional hereditary rule to merit-based leadership could be accomplished without sacrificing the stability and continuity that the realm required. She had proven that someone with Lannister blood could earn authority and respect through their own capabilities rather than simply inheriting them, and her success provided a model that could be emulated by others throughout the Seven Kingdoms. The resolution of the mystery surrounding Tyrion's daughter also provided closure for questions that had troubled network members for years. The success of the protection and education efforts had always been measured indirectly through reports and observations, but having concrete confirmation that their most ambitious hopes had been realized gave everyone involved a sense of accomplishment and validation that energized their continuing efforts. The broader implications for House Lannister were equally significant, though they would need to be managed carefully to avoid disrupting the delicate political balances that had been established throughout the realm. Lady Joanna's claim to Casterly Rock was legally unquestionable, but asserting that claim immediately could create conflicts that would undermine the stability that the network had worked so hard to achieve. Instead, they developed a long-term strategy that would gradually establish her position within the traditional Lannister hierarchy, while allowing her to continue the work she had been doing so effectively. The ancient laws of inheritance that had seemed like abstract legal principles during their research took on immediate practical significance as they considered how to integrate Lady Joanna's heritage into the existing power structures of Westeros. Her superior claim to the Lannister legacy was not just a matter of bloodlines, but reflected the deeper principle that leadership should be based on capability and merit rather than accidents of birth. The personal aspects of the resolution were perhaps the most emotionally significant for everyone involved. Lady Joanna's discovery of her true heritage provided her with a sense of identity and purpose that complemented rather than replaced the life she had built through her own efforts. She understood that she was not just Tyrion's daughter, but the inheritor of a tradition of service and responsibility that stretched back through centuries of Lannister leadership. The knowledge that her father had loved her enough to sacrifice his own relationship with her in order to ensure her safety and success provided a bittersweet resolution to questions about family that had shaped her throughout her life. She had always felt a sense of incompleteness about her origins, but now she understood that her father's absence had been an act of love rather than abandonment, and that the remarkable opportunities she had received had been expressions of care and investment rather than random good fortune. For Donal and Aelys, the successful resolution of their investigation provided a sense of accomplishment that went far beyond academic achievement. They had uncovered one of the most important secrets in the history of Westeros and had helped to ensure that this knowledge would be used wisely and effectively. Their role as custodians of dangerous information had evolved into participation in one of the most significant political transformations in the realm's history. The completion of their investigation also marked the beginning of new responsibilities and opportunities. Their knowledge of the network's operation and their demonstrated ability to handle sensitive information made them valuable resources for the ongoing development of the project. Rather than returning to routine scholarly pursuits, they found themselves positioned to contribute to efforts that would shape the future governance of Westeros for generations to come. The resolution of the mystery surrounding Tyrion's daughter thus represented not an ending but a transformation, both for the individuals directly involved and for the broader network that had made her success possible. The hidden truth had been revealed, but rather than disrupting the careful work of decades, it had strengthened and energized efforts to create a more just and effective system of governance throughout the Seven Kingdoms. As they contemplated the future implications of what they had accomplished, everyone involved understood that they had participated in something extraordinary, a peaceful revolution that had transformed the political landscape of Westeros while maintaining the stability and continuity that the realm required. The smallest lion had indeed given birth to the greatest, and the legacy of that achievement would echo through the halls of power for centuries to come. In the weeks and months that followed the revelation of Lady Joanna's true heritage, the profound implications of their discovery continued to unfold in ways that touched every aspect of life throughout the Westerlands and beyond. The knowledge that Tyrion Lannister's daughter had not only survived, but had become one of the most capable and respected leaders in Westeros created ripples of change that extended far beyond the immediate circle of those who had been directly involved in uncovering the truth. The process of integrating this knowledge into the existing structures of power and governance required the same careful planning and thoughtful execution that had characterized the original restoration project. Lady Joanna worked closely with the network's senior advisors to develop strategies that would allow her to gradually assume a more prominent role in Lannister affairs while maintaining the effectiveness of the work she had been doing in her established position. The reaction of the broader Lannister family to learning of her existence was complex and multifaceted, reflecting the political realities and personal dynamics that had shaped the house for generations. Some family members embraced the revelation as validation of Tyrion's worth, and as an opportunity to strengthen the house through the inclusion of such a capable leader. Others were more cautious, concerned about the potential disruption that such a significant change in the succession might create. But perhaps the most significant aspect of the aftermath was the way that Lady Joanna's example began to influence attitudes toward leadership and governance throughout the realm. Her success in earning authority through merit rather than simply inheriting it provided a powerful demonstration of the principles that the Restoration Project had been working to promote. Lords and ladies throughout Westeros began to pay more attention to the capabilities and character of potential leaders rather than focusing solely on their bloodlines and traditional claims. The personal healing that occurred during this period was equally important for everyone involved. Lady Joanna's discovery of her true heritage provided her with a sense of completeness and purpose that had been missing throughout her life, while also giving her a deeper understanding of the motivations and values that had shaped her character. She began to see connections between her own instincts and approaches to leadership and the traditions of service and responsibility that had characterized the greatest Lannister leaders throughout history. For Ulysses, the successful resolution of their investigation provided a sense of closure and satisfaction that validated her decades of loyal service to House Lannister. She had lived through some of the most turbulent periods in the family's history, had witnessed the rise and fall of various members, and had maintained her faith in the fundamental worth of the house even during its darkest moments. Learning that Tyrion's daughter had not only survived but had thrived beyond anyone's most optimistic expectations vindicated her belief that the Lannister legacy was worth preserving and protecting. Donald found that his role had evolved from scholar and investigator to participant in one of the most significant political transformations in the history of Westeros. His expertise in genealogy and his understanding of the historical precedents for the changes they were implementing made him a valuable advisor for the ongoing development of the network's activities. Rather than simply documenting events after they occurred, he was now helping to shape the future through his contributions to planning and strategy. The broader network of prepared leaders throughout the realm responded to the revelation of Lady Joanna's identity with renewed energy and commitment to their shared objectives. Her example demonstrated that the most ambitious goals of the Restoration Project were achievable, and her success provided inspiration for others who were working to improve governance in their own regions and circumstances. The ripple effects of the discovery extended into areas that none of the original planners had fully anticipated. The story of Lady Joanna's hidden heritage and remarkable achievements began to inspire a new generation of young people throughout Westeros, particularly young women, who saw in her example proof that capability and character could overcome the traditional limitations imposed by birth and circumstance. Educational institutions throughout the realm began to place greater emphasis on identifying and developing talent regardless of social origin, recognizing that the future stability and prosperity of Westeros would depend on having capable leaders at every level of society. The Citadel expanded its programs for training administrators and advisors, while noble houses began to take more seriously their responsibilities for identifying and nurturing promising individuals within their territories. The economic implications of the changes were equally significant, as the improved governance that resulted from having more capable leaders in positions of authority led to increased prosperity and stability throughout the realm. Trade flourished as political relationships became more predictable and reliable, while agricultural and industrial production increased as administrators became more skilled at managing resources and coordinating activities. Perhaps most importantly, the revelation of Lady Joanna's identity provided validation for the principle that had motivated the entire Restoration Project from its inception. The idea that leadership should be based on merit and capability rather than simply on inherited privilege had been tested in the most demanding circumstances and had proven successful beyond anyone's most optimistic expectations. The process of healing and integration that characterized this period was not limited to the individuals directly involved, but extended to the broader relationship between the great houses and the people they served. The demonstration that leaders could earn their authority through service and competence rather than simply inheriting it through bloodline created new possibilities for cooperation and mutual respect that had not existed under the traditional system. As the immediate aftermath of their discoveries settled into a new pattern of relationships and responsibilities, everyone involved began to appreciate the full significance of what they had accomplished. They had not simply uncovered a hidden family secret, but had participated in a transformation that would influence the governance of Westeros for generations to come. The knowledge that they had been part of something so significant and beneficial provided a deep sense of satisfaction and purpose that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. They had helped to prove that change was possible, that improvement was achievable, and that the future could be better than the past if people were willing to work together toward common goals with wisdom, patience, and dedication. The aftermath of their investigation thus became not just a period of adjustment and integration, but a time of hope and renewed commitment to the values and objectives that had motivated their efforts from the beginning. The smallest lion had indeed birthed the greatest, and the legacy of that achievement would continue to inspire and guide the development of Westeros for centuries to come. As the sun sets over the Sunset Sea, casting golden light across the ancient stones of Casterly Rock, the great fortress settles into the peaceful rhythm that has marked the end of countless days throughout its 1,000-year history. The golden lions carved into the walls seemed to glow with inner warmth in the fading light, their faces serene with the satisfaction of secrets finally revealed and purposes finally fulfilled. The waves below crashed gently against the rocks that form the foundation of the mighty castle, their eternal rhythm providing a soothing counterpoint to the whispered conversations that echo through the halls where history has been made and remade. In the chambers where Tyrion once studied and dreamed, where Tywin once planned and schemed, and where countless generations of Lannisters have lived and loved and passed into legend, there is now a sense of completion that speaks to the deepest longings of the human heart for justice, wisdom, and the triumph of truth over deception. Lady Joanna has returned to her own lands, but the knowledge of her heritage travels with her like a golden thread that connects her to the ancient legacy of her house, while inspiring her to continue the work of transformation that has become her life's purpose. In the councils she attends and the decisions she makes, the wisdom of generations flows through her actions, but it is wisdom tempered by her own experience and guided by her own understanding of what the realm needs to flourish. The network that protected her for so many years continues its quiet work throughout the Seven Kingdoms, but now it operates with renewed purpose and confidence, knowing that its most ambitious goals are not merely dreams but achievable realities. The young people who have been identified and prepared for leadership roles throughout Westeros carry forward the principles of service and competence that will shape the realm's future. But they do so with the knowledge that they are part of something larger than themselves, a movement toward justice and prosperity that transcends the ambitions of any single house or individual. In the libraries and archives of Casterly Rock, Maester Donald continues his scholarly work, but his research now focuses on documenting the positive changes that have transformed governance throughout the realm. His chronicles will tell future generations not just what happened, but why it happened, and how it can continue to happen, ensuring that the lessons learned through decades of careful planning and patient implementation will not be lost to time. Alice has found peace in her twilight years, knowing that her lifetime of service has contributed to something truly meaningful and lasting. The young girl she helped to protect has grown into a leader whose influence extends far beyond anything the old woman could have imagined, and the house she served so faithfully has been redeemed through the triumph of its best values and traditions. The ancient prophecies speak of cycles within cycles, of seeds planted in darkness that bloom in light, of whispers that become songs that echo through eternity. The story of Tyrion's lost daughter embodies all of these themes, demonstrating how love and sacrifice and careful planning can create possibilities that transcend the limitations of the present moment and extend hope far into the future. Throughout the Westerlands and beyond, the people who have benefited from improved governance and more just leadership may never know the full story of how these changes came to pass. They may never learn of the hidden networks and secret preparations that made their prosperity possible, or of the individuals who sacrificed personal recognition to ensure that capable leaders would be available when they were needed most. But perhaps this is as it should be. The greatest achievements in governance are often those that are least visible, changes that occur so gradually and naturally that they seem inevitable rather than revolutionary. The transformation of Westeros from a realm governed by the accidents of birth to one guided by the principles of merit and service has been accomplished not through conquest or upheaval, but through patience and wisdom and the quiet determination of people who believed that a better future was possible. As the stars emerge in the darkening sky above Casterly Rock, they seem to form patterns that tell the story of hidden truths revealed and ancient promises fulfilled. The golden lions rest peacefully in their stone niches, knowing that their legacy has been secured not through the preservation of old ways, but through the embrace of new possibilities. The endless cycle of family secrets and political revelations continues, for there are always mysteries to be solved and truths to be uncovered in the great Game of Thrones. But tonight, in this moment of quiet satisfaction and peaceful reflection, there is time to appreciate what has been accomplished and to rest in the knowledge that the future is in capable hands. The legacy of this story will be remembered not as a tale of discovery and revelation, but as an example of how love can transcend death, how wisdom can bridge generations, and how the patient work of preparation and education can create possibilities that transform the world. In the gentle lapping of waves against ancient stone, in the whisper of wind through golden halls, in the dreams of those who sleep peacefully under the protection of just governance, the story continues. And in the morning, when the sun rises again over the sunset sea and casts new light across the realm, the work will continue, guided by the example of those who understood that the greatest service is often the most hidden, and that the most lasting victories are those that make the world a better place for generations yet to come. Thanks for joining me on this incredible journey through the hidden corners of Westeros, where we discovered that the most powerful secrets are not always those that destroy, but those that build, protect, and inspire. If you enjoyed tonight's exploration into the Lannister legacy, don't forget to subscribe for more tales from the Seven Kingdoms and beyond. Until next time, may your dreams be filled with golden lions and peaceful shores.